Hello and welcome to Peaceful at Heart. My name is Cedric Martin and I'll be your host. Each episode we're going to take a closer look at the book Peaceful at Heart, Anabaptist Reflections on Healthy Masculinity. Each episode we're going to dive into the chapters, hear from the authors, and think a little bit more about what healthy masculinity looks like in our modern context. Today we're joined by Gareth Brandt. Gareth, welcome. Thank you so much for your work on this book. To start off, would you mind just telling us a little bit more about that first book that you wrote, Under Construction?
Yeah, actually, it needs to be rewritten because it's now more than 10 years old. That was actually one of the reasons why. I'll tell you a bit of a story. One of the reasons why Don Neufeld wrote this book was as a follow-up. He was probably the first person to respond to my book and to say, "Oh, this is so needed today." We didn't know each other at all. He had just I don't know how he found out about it, but he picked it up and we began to have a conversation and now have a friendship as a result. Wow. So that in itself for me is worth writing the book. So the new edited book is kind of meant as a new version, really, of the previous one, which was meant to be kind of an Anabaptist alternative to the Wild at Heart genre. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or as I said, this is a men's book for men who don't read men's books by an author who didn't.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of what I've always been of the opinion previously, that there's many other issues that are more important in our spirituality than our genitalia, or even our gender identity. But as a man in midlife, just began to be convinced that perhaps that may also have some impact on our spirituality. And so that's what, on one of my sabbaticals, that's kind of what initiated the project. I just read everything I could read and found out I was a loser of a man, according to that. And so then one of my friends said, "Well, then why don't you write a better book?" So that's why I say it's for men who don't fit those kind of Wild at Heart stereotypes. Anyway, so that's how I got into this whole thing. I am not your I did some men's retreats. I never went to any as a young man, or even in most of my life. I never went to any at all because I just didn't feel I related to the Promise Keepers and all that sort of stuff that was out there when I was a man. Kind of in my 30s and 40s, or even 20s for that matter. That was all that was there, and I just didn't feel like I fit. So anyway, that's a bit of an introduction to myself. I've been a professor at Columbia Bible College now this is my 21st year, after 14 years in youth ministry. I started in a more conservative Mennonite denomination, and then switched to Mennonite Church Canada, where I feel very much at home. I feel like I've come home after not being exiled, I guess, but the roots will always be there, but I feel like I've found a good theological and spiritual home.
Yeah.
So that's a bit about me, about an introduction.
Yeah, that's great. So Gareth, I just wanted to say that I appreciated your perspective and your communal approach to your chapter. You were bringing in testimonials of other men. You even quoted some of the other authors that were in this book. For someone that was apparently just sitting alone and writing in your office by yourself, you did a great job of bringing a community-oriented chapter together. Now, I'm wondering, the title of your chapter is Men in Community. And we're sitting here in the wake of COVID-19, and I'm wondering how your perspective might have changed. Will there be maybe a bit more of a falling out due to the isolation? Do you think that there's going to be a better appreciation of time spent in community in the future?
Yeah, I think it could be both. It remains to be seen in some ways. I do think that the need for community might be even more acute because of some of the lack of community that has happened due to COVID. But I don't think it's going to be just automatic that we will return to the same kind of communal forms that we had before. I think it's going to have to be intentional. In some ways, some things, the potential is there for things to fall off. There's no doubt about it in my mind. I don't think it'll be automatic that we'll automatically gain a deeper appreciation for it, but the potential is there.
So the idea that we don't take it necessarily for granted, even once it returns, for sure.
Exactly.
Gareth, you talk about how there are unique challenges for men when it comes to experiencing community. And there's a desire to withdraw instead of gravitating towards community. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, part of it is just, I think, the culture of independence. That is not only a male thing, I think, in particular in Western cultures, but it's also a Western cultural trait generally of all people. The independence is good, and we value being able to do stuff yourself. And I think that's probably the deepest and most unrecognized reason why it's so hard. And I think in particular for men, because men have kind of been in charge of the culture for millennia in Western cultures. And so I think we're fighting against something that's pretty deep.
Mm-hmm. So I guess this sort of relates to what you were just talking about before, in that if we want to build a stronger community out of this, intentional community is a word that's thrown around a lot. And I guess to be intentional means that even though the desire there is to withdraw, we have to push against that, I suppose.
Yeah, and just to recognize, I think so often we don't recognize our cultural privileges and just the realities. You get busy with life and you just do stuff and you don't recognize some of the deeper things.
Mm-hmm. You were sharing with me a little bit before, but about how you haven't always thought about masculinity as a large part of your faith, but what role do you think now maybe, or what role could masculinity play in your faith or perhaps in the church?
Yeah, my first thing I wrote down was not much. But I think one of the things that I've realized in the last decade or more is to understand the power that comes with white privilege and white male privilege. And I think that's one of the most important things in my own spiritual formation in the last number of years as a white middle-aged male, is just realizing and understanding the power and privilege that comes with that. And now, even though I'm not the stereotypical man, I have a slight physique. I'm an artist. I write poetry rather than going to the gym. But at the same time, I still share the same privileges of that. Like, as I call it when I lecture, this is the most powerful people group on the planet. Mm-hmm. And I think by not acknowledging and recognizing, then I'm perpetuating. And I think that's where I got to repent from previously, where I didn't acknowledge it as just, their personality, family background, all those things are more important. And I think I've come to realize it's important to acknowledge, and that I think plays a role in how I see everything, from spirituality to church. And so perhaps I'm just on the beginning stages of realizing and acknowledging that.
No, that's good, and that gives us hope that we can keep reimagining what our faith looks like, and perhaps what our gender, our masculinity might look like moving forward.
I know I have 3 young adult sons, and I know they're way better at it than I am. It's much more inherent. It's part of a generational thing too. They're in their 20s and 30s, and I'm very proud of where they're at. And as a 60-year-old, then I'm thinking legacy now rather than, I still got to repent for myself too, but I'm also looking at the next generation, and I'm encouraged by where younger men are taking spirituality.
That sort of leads me into my next question about in your chapter you say men are stronger and more authentically human in community. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I teach spiritual formation courses, and when I introduce the course, then I always say, here's my subtitle. My subtitle is How to Become a Decent Human Being 101. And so to me, that is part of what I mean by that men in particular, because of the independent kind of swing, need each other and need other human beings as well of other gender identities, not just those who identify as males, but need community beyond that. I think Carol Penner's critique in at the end of the book was very, very fair. In defense, I felt that my topic was restricted to writing about men and community, but I think she writes about something very important, and that is we also need to see ourselves in broader community beyond just those who are like us. And so I think that's part of the strength of spirituality, is to understand that. And the authentic human is just, to be real. We become more real when others feed back to us what they see in us. And that, it's sometimes difficult for us to hear, but I think necessary.
Yeah, there needs to be sort of an openness within yourself, and then an openness within your group, I guess, to be authentic. So I wonder, for yourself, you talked a bit about your sons, but for you growing up, did you have any role models did they leave any sort of impact on what your vision of healthy masculinity is, or what that could look like?
Yeah, and obviously both my parents were significant. My father was a very simple farmer, very inarticulate about his, I don't recall him saying much about his spirituality at all. Only has, grade 7 education, was not a particularly successful farmer, just what today would be called a hobby farm. But the role model that he was what I would call kind of a quiet loyalty. He would show up. And to me, that's one of the important values, is just to show up. When there was a church Bible study, it would be the pastor, the deacon, and my dad. He wouldn't have said anything, but he showed up. And to me, that's kind of an endearing model that he's been for me. My mom was, I would guess, like in psychological terms, I would say it was a mother-dominated household. She's much more extroverted and articulate. And that, I think, helped me as a man to recognize that it doesn't have to be the stereotypical. In some ways, they were in the wrong generation, at the wrong time, where they, my dad felt that he was inadequate because he wasn't enough of a leader, and my mom wasn't allowed to be enough of a leader, even though that's who she was. But I think that was a wonderful role model for me, in that they weren't the traditional couple, even though they felt inadequate as a result, or constrained in some ways. But I think they were wonderful models, both of them, for me in that. And the other one, I'm not convinced yet My primary role model as a teenager and as a young adult was also was the man who coached me, but also the one who abused me sexually as a young boy. So that's a bit of a mixed bag on that one. I now have come to terms with the sexual abuse, and yet still recognize that there was some important role modeling of, teaching sports and these sorts of things. But I think the other than the lasting pain that has caused, I think in a positive sense, it makes me wary of power, which I think is important for men today, is to be wary. It goes back to what I was saying much earlier there. I don't see that as necessarily as, when you say role models, I generally think of positive.
Sure.
In that sense, it's also negative, but in a positive sense, it points to dangers. And I do mention that significantly in the book, so I am open to talk about it. But it's, and I have, the major part of that journey of healing is a few decades behind me. But even in the present, I mentioned at the beginning of the chapter a more recent trauma in my life, and some of that old stuff comes back, and you redo it in a new way. I'm getting away from the topic here.
That's okay. No, this is all part of your experience of what shaped what your vision of healthy masculinity could look like, and the opposite of that, I suppose, too.
Yeah, and I don't. I just can't think of. I've had some significant mentors in my life, but those have been more, like the internship supervisor while I was in seminary, those sorts of things. And I'm not sure that, there was anything really about a role model for masculine spirituality at all there. It just wasn't part of the agenda of that particular relationship.
Well, in your chapter, you talk about how when you were writing your other book, coming out of that is what sort of formed a lot of these men's groups that you were able to continue with and to learn from and to grow from. And that helped others as well, I'm sure, to have those spaces. So it's all connected.
Most definitely. It was incredible. Just the depth of relationship I had with these half dozen or 10 men in my own church. Became more vulnerable with each other than any of us had ever been before with other men. Unfortunately, we aren't meeting during COVID. But my guess, we did meet outside a couple of times last summer around a fire. But other than that, it's been a bit more sporadic than I think many of us would have preferred. But that goes for everybody.
Gareth, we're just about running out of time here, but I want to thank you for spending your time with us. Before you do go, do you have any sort of sending thoughts to send with us into our day?
No, I didn't. I don't have anything else to say. I think your questions were good, and I don't have any profound kind of nugget.
That's okay. Life doesn't always have to be boiled down into a nugget.
Yeah, true. Sometimes it turns out to be a nugget of something else that you throw away. Or a flush.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate it. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Peaceful at Heart was recorded in the city of Takaranto, the land covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This is the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. we all eat out of the dish, and all of us that share this territory with one spoon. We want to acknowledge the ancestral lands and waterways of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Takaranto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We wish to thank them and any other nations who cared for this land. Colonization is a continuing form of oppression, so it is important that we acknowledge the lands and digital spaces that we are holding and taking up. We remember the acknowledged and unacknowledged, recorded and unrecorded, past, present, and future. We are all treaty people.